struck by the infamous truck-kun. A boy is reborn as a powerful mage, retaining memories from his past life. He dwells in the forest, hunting boar at the mere age of 8. As time progresses, he begins to hunt demons, further honing his magical skills. After another tough day at work, this guy was so tired that he didn't even notice the signal while crossing the street. As a result, his life on Earth came to an end, and he was reincarnated in another world where magic exists. As a baby, his father's carriage was attacked by a demon, and a man named Merlin found the little boy who was named Shin and raised him in the forest. His adoptive grandfather also taught Shin magic and hunting. Although Shin did not remember his death, he retained memories from his past life, including the fact that there was no magic in the world he came from. Moreover, Shin grew up receiving visits from Merlin's friends, whom he considered his family, such as Mitchell and Melida. Melida found it too dangerous for Merlin to allow a child to hunt animals like boars. But as soon as Shin turned 10, Merlin decided to take his grandson to hunt demons, something a bit more dangerous than a mere boar. In this world, everyone could enjoy the benefits of magical forces. However, those who couldn't control magic became violent and turned into demons, a rule that applied to all creatures, including humans. His grandfather explained this to Shin, stating that before they hunted a demon, they needed to locate one. He then taught Shin a searching spell to help him detect all the creatures around him. Shin managed to cast the spell perfectly on his first try, sensing the magic of the forest creatures and even Melida, who was calmly reading a book at home. As Shin continued to analyze the magic around him, he felt a strange sensation from a demonic power and got excited about the idea of protecting the place as his grandfather had protected a country from a demon in his past. When he encountered the creature, he didn't hesitate and launched a spell that defeated the red-brown demon, making his grandfather proud, despite almost having a heart attack from worrying about his grandson's safety. At night, Merlin told everyone about Shin's first hunt, and they were impressed by how quickly the boy could learn magic, and by the fact that he was already at the same level as Mitchell. Moreover, they knew Shin came from another world, though they didn't care much about that. What truly mattered was that both Merlin and Melida considered Shin as a grandson. The same was true for the boy, who, despite not having met his parents and knowing nothing of where he came from, was very grateful to have Merlin and his friends as his family. But years later, Shin celebrated his 15th birthday with his chosen family, and now, as a young adult, everyone wanted to know what he would choose for his future, including his uncle Dis. Although the young man was a prodigy in magic and a skilled fighter, Shin realized he had never left the forest and didn't know his options well. During the celebration, Shin discovered that there was a demon hunters society he could join. He could also enter the royal order because of his fighting skills, or become a simple merchant of artifacts. However, since his grandfather had focused so much on teaching him magic and had neglected to teach practical things about the world, it made things a bit challenging. Everyone questioned the way Merlin had raised Shin. To show his reasons, Merlin took all his friends to a remote location in the forest using a teleportation spell cast by Shin and asked him to demonstrate his power. Shin visualized the necessary elements and how the magic worked without chance, needing only concentration. Having been a dedicated chemistry student in his past life, Shin could visualize the chemical elements well, which explained the powerful spells he could cast, which were nothing more than science. However, as the people of that world didn't seem to know much about chemistry, everyone was astonished by the power Shin demonstrated. Yet, such power and skill could cause problems for him or create conflict and an imbalance of power, as everyone would want to take advantage of his ability. Worse still, he knew nothing about the world outside the forest. Thus, Uncle Dis suggested that he enroll in a magic school, an educational institution for exceptional magic students located in the capital, which would be good for Shin since he had never interacted with people his age. However, from this simple meeting, Shin discovered not only that he knew nothing about the world, but also that he was unaware of many things about his own family, like the fact that his uncle was the king of the kingdom, and the two young people he considered as siblings were from his uncle's escort, with the girl, Chris, from the royal guard, and Sieg, a court mage. Not knowing he had a royal family member, he learned that Mitchell had been a knight commander. But, as the fact about his uncle was more shocking, he asked why a king would visit his grandfather, and Uncle Dis explained that the country Merlin had saved from the demon was exactly his country. He recounted how at that time 2 entire squads were eliminated, and a city vanished off the map because of the demon. At that time, he was at the Magic Academy and was part of the 3rd squad. But just as he was about to be attacked by the demon, Merlin, along with Melida, protected him and ended the demon with teamwork. And since then, the 2 had been considered national heroes, and the couple, who were married at the time, became friends with Dis. After so many revelations, Shin decided to follow his uncle's advice and went to the capital to study at the magic school, and his grandparents accompanied him, making everyone excited about the arrival of the heroes in the town. At the accommodations that Dis arranged for them, the 3 were welcomed by various staff members like a butler, a housekeeper, and even a chef. After all, the guy's uncle was the king of the place. Besides the VIP treatment, Shin went shopping for the first time in his life and took a walk around the city, finally getting to know a place outside the forests. But on the tour, he ended up getting lost, and during this, he encountered a group of guys who were bothering a young woman. The guys thought they were the greatest for being demon hunters, but Shin told them the truth. Just because they protected the city did not give them the right to harass the young woman. They were furious with Shin, but the boy handled them with his fighting skills, and the young woman thanked him. Shortly after, a friend of the girl appeared, and Shin was charmed by her cuteness. The 2 girls go out to lunch with Shin to thank him for his help, and there they introduce themselves as Maria and Sicilian. Shin discovers that they 2 are going to take the test to enter the magic school next month, meaning all 3 would be studying together. Additionally, like everyone in town, Maria is super excited about the arrival of the national heroes and even mentions she's eager to meet their grandson, knowing he will also be joining the magic school. This makes Shin a bit uncomfortable, so he decides to leave and bids the girls farewell, without mentioning that he is the very grandson everyone is talking about. As he leaves, we see that he has slightly stirred Sicilian's heart. On the day of the admission test, Shin arrives at the venue excited to take the exam, but ends up meeting a future classmate named Kurt, who is rather arrogant and thinks too highly of himself for being the heir of a count. Despite his title, Shin treats him like anyone else, which further irritates Kurt. However, it's forbidden to use one's authority within the school by law, and Prince August, observing Kurt's behavior, reminds him that disrespecting the law is akin to disrespecting the royalty and worthy of punishment. This clearly puts Kurt in his place. After he leaves, August introduces himself to Shin, who is thrilled to meet the son of his uncle Dis, seeing the prince as his cousin and completely ignoring his royal status, treating him like a normal person, which makes August happy since he knows that sooner or later everyone at school will start to flatter him, and it's good to have someone who sees him just as a cousin. The 2 quickly strike up a friendship, and at that moment, Maria and Sicilian arrive at the school and are confused to see Shin talking so intimately with the prince. Later, they take the written exam and proceed to the practical test, where the teacher asks everyone to demonstrate the best spell they can cast. Shin is excited to see the spells of his future classmates, but ends up quite disappointed as everyone casts very simple magics and still acts as if they had done something amazing, only varying the elements used, with one casting fire, another water, another air, and another earth. But beyond that, all the demonstrations leave Shin appalled by their mediocrity. When it's his turn, the teacher asks him to restrain himself since the king had warned her of his power. But even holding back, Shin causes a massive explosion in the room, leaving everyone astounded by his ability. After the test, the approval scores are released, and of course, Shin achieves the best result. And because of this, the school asks him to make a speech at the freshman ceremony. He questions why August doesn't give the speech since he's the prince, but his cousin explains that in the school, positions are defined solely by merit, and that class distinctions don't exist there. Also enjoying the fact that Shin has to give the speech to everyone. However, Kurt, who continues to believe that nobles should have advantages because of their titles, does not like this merit awarded to Shin. Meanwhile, he's casually removing the defense magic that came with his uniform and replacing it with his own, which is much stronger and more useful than the spell the school put, even shocking his grandmother with the level of his power. On the day of the ceremony, in addition to the king, people from the nobility, as well as Shin's grandparents, are present to welcome the freshmen and listen to Shin's speech. There, he discovers that Maria and Sicilian are also part of the nobility, while they finally find out he was the grandson of the national heroes. After his speech, the 2 girls ask Shin for help. They explained that a boy was bothering Sicilian using the power of his family to threaten her, even though she made it clear she wasn't interested in him. And this boy was none other than Kurt, the troublesome boy who arrives already jealous of Sicilian for speaking with Shin, acting as if she were committed to him. The girl gets nervous, but Shin assures her that he will protect her, giving Sicilian the strength to confront Kurt and tell him that she refused his proposal and that she does not take orders from him. This only causes Kurt to again use his family's power to force her to accept his proposal. But August sees everything and puts an end to the situation by reminding Kurt that his actions were an affront to the royalty. August also takes the opportunity to tease his cousin about the way he promised to protect Sicilian, leaving the two embarrassed. But even with the problem resolved for the moment, it wasn't guaranteed that Kurt would indeed leave her in peace. So, Shin decides to take his friends to his house, along with two of August's guards who accompany him everywhere. Everyone is excited to meet the national heroes, and Shin explains to his grandparents the situation with Sicilian and shares that his plan is to cast his protection spell on her uniform just as he did on his own. But his grandmother Melida explains that the magic Shin placed on his uniform made it a high-level artifact and of a value she couldn't even say. Melida then asks if Sicilian is worthy of accepting something so valuable. But the girl feels bad and starts crying, saying she isn't worthy and even apologizes for wanting to use Shin's goodwill. But Melida says that this makes her worthy because she showed she understands the value of what she will receive, besides demonstrating honesty. Thus, Shin places the protection magic on Sicilian's uniform, and King Dis, also there, realizing the value of that magic, asks Shin to keep it a secret because if the information leaked, it could make the army interested in the spell and declare war. He then realizes that he can't keep using the magic, lamenting because he thought about casting it on August's uniform too. But of course, Dis makes an exception for the safety of his son, saying it's okay if Shin uses the magic moderately. So, at the end of that meeting, Shin ended up casting a spell on all the uniforms, including those of August's guard, except for Maria who didn't want to carry a state secret with her. Sicilian thanks him for the help, but Shin says that to ensure her safety, he will accompany her home every day to prevent any disturbances. She asks if it won't be too much trouble, but Shin explains that it will be very easy for him thanks to his portal. Then, he gives a small demonstration by taking the whole group to his house in the forest in a matter of seconds and explains that unlike a teleportation spell, his portal merely connects two places, allowing him to create portals to any location he has already visited. As promised, Shin began picking up Sicilian from her house through the portal to ensure her safety, and the atmosphere between them only grew warmer, causing Maria to end up feeling like a third wheel. Of course, August didn't miss the chance to tease about his cousin arriving at school with two girls on his first day. After class, the teacher showed them around the school and explained that it was divided into two buildings, one for classes and the other for offices, laboratories, and study group rooms. There were various groups they could join. One of August's guards took an interest in one of the groups, but thought he couldn't participate since he had to stay close to the prince. However, August reminded him that he had no royal authority at school and therefore didn't need guards there. But Shin realized that August's reason for freeing the guy was just to get rid of the escort and have some space. Then, a girl from the class asked if Shin was interested in joining any of the groups, but he said no. August thought that none of them would be challenging for someone as powerful as Shin and suggested that he start his own study group. Shin was hesitant, but all his classmates were interested in joining a group led by Shin, and even the teacher showed interest in being the advisor. They got so excited that they started talking as if Shin had already agreed to the idea, but he said he couldn't imagine what the study topics would be. Someone suggested he talk about his grandparents, but to Shin's surprise, the teacher mentioned that there was already a study group about the two national heroes. Then, a girl suggested that they study all types of magic inspired by Shin, and that became the theme of the new study group. At night, King Dis held a meeting with important people from the kingdom to discuss the increase in demons, which, although small, was enough for them to decide to investigate the cause. For this, Dis sent one of them, named Dominic, to join the Demon Hunting Society. Meanwhile, Kurt's father found out how his son had been behaving at school and using his position. He scolded Kurt, but he argued that it wasn't right to be treated the same as a mere commoner and bizarrely began to complain about how no one saw how special he was. starting to think that it all began with Shin's arrival. His father realized his son was a bit delusional and slapped him and ordered him locked in his room to cool off. The next day, everyone found out that Kurt was grounded, and Shin asked if he had always been this difficult, but his cousin explained that although he had always been somewhat arrogant, he was a normal student, and his escort said he changed after he started frequenting Mr. Strom's lab. August explained that Mr. Strom had been exiled from the Empire and had invited everyone who was reasonable in magic to visit his lab. But they found it strange and so did not go with Kurt, who despite being blindfolded, acted normally as if he could see through some magic. Meanwhile, at Kurt's house, his mother, worried sick about her son, sought help from Mr. Strom to try to bring him back to his senses. But instead, the man only reinforced how special Kurt was and how he could achieve anything he wanted. With this, Kurt mentioned how he couldn't get the girl he wanted because of Shin, and Mr. Strom told him to eliminate that obstacle, while casting a spell that was clearly the cause of his change in behavior that was making him worse. Back at school, in the cafeteria, August asked if Shin would stop accompanying Sicilian, now that Kurt was grounded and couldn't bother her anymore. This made the girl sad, but Shin commented that he saw no problem in accompanying her for no reason since their houses were close, which made her very happy. Although the two clearly liked each other, August commented that it was good they returned to school together since the two girls might attract other problematic guys. But Shin explained that if they were in danger, his searching magic would detect it, and the other students commented on not being able to use searching magic. Shin then asked if any of them had ever hunted a demon, and everyone found it strange since they hadn't even graduated from high school yet. Then Shin explained that the magic of a demon is dark and abnormal and thus can be distinguished, and the same could happen with ordinary people. He mentioned that he had hunted a demon when he was 10 years old and began to describe what it was like, leaving everyone amazed once again at how Shin could do such incredible things. Later, the students talked about the study group when Shin felt a demonic energy, and looking in the direction from where the magic was coming, he saw Kurt, who was clearly out of his mind. He cast a fire spell at them and Shin blocked it with a protection spell and asked August and Sicilian to channel with their uniform. The two complied, helping Shin block the attacks, but he got slightly burned, which worried Sicilian. But then his self-healing made him good as new. Consumed by hatred, Kurt started to go crazier to the point of becoming a demonoid. With the situation becoming even more dangerous, Shin asked everyone to leave immediately. August said he wanted to help him, but since none of them had ever hunted a demon before, Shin said they would only get in the way. As soon as everyone left, Shin began to fight Kurt in a battle, but the demonoid started to talk, making Shin strange since he thought that demons completely lost their reason. Shin then decided to control the magic to see if it was possible to save Kurt. But he began to gather so much magic, forming an amount sufficient to cause an explosion that would destroy the school, forcing Shin to end him with just one strike, to protect everyone's safety. Even though he had killed other demons before and knew he had done the right thing, Shin began to feel bad. After all, the other demons he had faced were not human and much less a classmate. Then, all his friends showed up, shocked to see how well Shin had fought, though they also mourned what had happened to Kurt. August explained that the recent event would undoubtedly shake the entire kingdom, considering it was only the second demonoid sighting in history. Soon after, his soldiers arrived, concerned for everyone's safety, but he assured them that Shin, the grandson of the national heroes, had already defeated the demon, leading them all to hail Shin as the new hero. After that, while Mr. Strom celebrates the success of his experiment with Kurt, Shin and his classmates wonder how he turned into a demonoid since the only previous case was due to an advanced cursed spell, and Kurt was hardly knowledgeable about magic. This makes Shin suspect that someone might have used him as a test subject. Later, Shin arrives home to find his uncle Dis waiting to announce that he will be awarded a hero's medal for defeating the demonoid. Merlin questions Dis because before they went to town, he promised not to use Shin for political purposes. However, Dis explains that when the first demonoid appeared in the kingdom, it was nearly exterminated, and as news spread that it almost happened again, but Shin kept everyone safe. He, as the king, could not fail to honor the new hero. He promises to do everything to protect Shin from opportunists. Merlin accepts the terms but makes it clear that if anything changes, they would leave the kingdom. Thus, everyone talks about the new hero Shin who defeated a demonoid, and at school, all students want to join his study group, leading the teacher to set a knowledge requirement since he couldn't accept everyone. Then, Shin welcomes 2 new members to his study group, Mark and Olivia, who met the teacher's requirements. Since Mark is the son of a blacksmith, Shin asks him to forge a new weapon for him. Of course, Shin had warned Dis about his suspicions that someone had experimented with Kurt, and the king asks Dominic and the head of security, Dennis, to investigate thoroughly. This leads his men to go and interrogate Mr. Strom, who visited Kurt on the day he turned into a demonoid. Upon arrival, they find it odd that the professor can see despite having his eyes covered. He explains that he used a spell to continue seeing and shares that he was born into a noble family in the Empire, but lost his eyes in a family feud and was exiled from the kingdom. Then, the investigators begin the conversation that really matters, starting with the knowledge that he was a teacher of very talented magical students, leading Mr. Strom to lament the incident that occurred with his student, Kurt. The two then pretend they were there seeking a magic expert like him to examine the demonized body. As Mr. Strom leads the two to where he believes the body is, Shin discusses with Mark his preference for swords with thinner blades, and one of his friends suggests having a sword with replaceable blades to use the hilt multiple times, making it cheaper. Mark likes the idea so much he asks Shin to stop by his father's workshop after school, and everyone in the group asks to go along. Later, when Mr. Strom finally reaches the location, he realizes he was not there to analyze bodies. The investigator explains that he gave himself away in the earlier conversation because, right after the incident with Kurt, the king had issued an order to keep the person who was demonized a secret to avoid tarnishing the family's name. Yet he knew the new demonoid was Kurt. Instead of being frightened by being caught, he laughs a classic villainous laugh and confesses that he indeed experimented on Kurt. Just as the study group was walking leisurely to Mark's house, they are caught off guard by an explosion caused by Strom, who had just struck the man who had interrogated him. Shin quickly realizes that he was responsible for Kurt's tragic fate and attacks the professor in anger. The two exchange powerful magic blows, but despite all of Shin's power, Strom manages to defend himself, and at that moment, Strom's mask breaks, revealing his demonic red eyes. He was a demonoid with intelligence who had come to view humans as mere insignificant creatures. Shin decides that he must stop him at all costs before something worse happens and sets a trap that catches him off guard with a sunlight beam spell that creates a massive explosion, defeating the demonoid and turning the ground to glass from the heat. Everyone celebrates the victory, and Dominic and the captain of the court's magic division, Olgren, congratulate the young hero who has just protected the kingdom from another demonoid. However, Shin had only converged sunlight into a heat beam and found it odd that the beam had caused an explosion, leading him to question whether he had actually hit Strom. And Shin was right to suspect because, although injured, the demonoid was very much alive and had indeed released the explosion spell to escape unnoticed. However, having seen Shin's power up close, he admits that if he had taken a bit more damage, it would have been his end, making him decide to take measures to ensure that Shin does not interfere in his plans again. Life continues as usual for the group, and Melida becomes curious about her grandson's love life. Maria explains that although it's clear Shin and Sicilian are in love with each other, Sicilian doesn't know how to act because he is her first love. Later, the whole group goes to Mark's workshop, and while they have fun, Shin is still wondering if he really defeated Strom. He shares his concerns with August, explaining that he repeated the same heat spell used to hit Strom on other days, and each time it only caused craters, but no explosion like on that day. August suggests that he can ask for anything from Mark's father, and the royalty would cover the expenses since Shin was the only one capable of facing the demonoid. As Shin passes on the weapons he wants to the blacksmith, we see that outside the kingdom, in the Blusphia Empire, a man named Zest passes information about the kingdom's situation to the emperor, who wants to take advantage of the kingdom's troubles with demons to attack. After talking with the blacksmith, Shin asks Mark what else they sold, and he explains that they sell household utensils and accessories. Shin thinks about buying something for Sicilian, which leaves the girl all dreamy, but he just wanted to give her an accessory enchanted with protective magic, making Sicilian feel as if she had been misled. However, even though Shin's motives were not exactly romantic, she is very happy with the ring he chose for her, and there is even a moment between them. After that, the day of the award ceremony finally arrives and Shin is applauded by everyone for having saved the kingdom from the demonoid. He is awarded a medal and named the new national hero, just as his uncle Dis had promised Merlin. In front of everyone present, he announces that Shin should not be used for political or military gains. However, the king's announcement didn't prevent Shin from having fans, which resulted in his doorstep being crowded with admirers of the new hero the very next day, forcing him to use his portal to get to school in peace. This surprises the new members of the study group who were not yet familiar with the portal's magic. Shin tries to explain how it works, but no one understands, and he tells them not to feel bad because even his grandfather, a national hero, couldn't grasp how that magic worked. Then, Shin gets the idea to level up everyone in the study group so they would be better prepared for any incidents. To do this, he asks everyone to improve the magic they already know, whether it's defensive or offensive. He asks them to start by testing how much magical power they can control. His classmates are confused, thinking they needed more elaborate spells to improve, but Shin clarifies what really matters, and no one understands his explanation. Then, Shin asks Maria to cast a barrier spell, a simple magic everyone knew. However, Shin analyzes it and says it's too thin to repel any attacks, and asks Sicilian to activate the barrier magic he placed in her ring. Everyone is amazed to see such an incredible two-layer barrier that was much more resilient than Maria's, even though it was the same spell. He then reminds his friends that in his fight against Strom, he blocked his first attack using a barrier spell as well. Everyone is surprised because they thought he had used a more elaborate magic than just a simple barrier, so Shin demonstrates his own control over magic, leaving everyone terrified at the sheer power. After making it clear about the importance of controlling magic, Shin says they will train this control every day during the study group time. Back in the Blusphia Empire, we find out that it was exactly there that Strom was recovering from the damages he received in the fight against Shin, and that it was he who had the informant Zest suggest that the Empire declare war against the kingdom. He discusses this with his maid Miria, appearing quite excited for his plan to go into action. At the end of the class, Shin goes home with his friends using the portal again due to his fans who were everywhere. Everyone is excited about starting to learn from Shin, who was trained by the national hero, Merlin. But his grandfather says that although he taught magic to Shin, he always had his own vision, focusing on visualizing the process of the magic rather than the outcome, raising questions like what is fire and why it burns instead of simply visualizing the fire, which allows him to create entirely new and powerful visualizations like the portal. Then, he shows everyone that Shin's method works, and despite being difficult, he managed to make the portal thanks to a paper description that Shin gave him teaching the portal spell step by step, inspiring all his classmates by showing that it was indeed possible to do everything Shin could by understanding his methods. Later, Melida talks with Merlin and says she understands that he tried to learn the portal so that Shin would not be called abnormal by anyone else for not knowing his magics, showing that it was indeed possible to perform them, and it was also a great way to motivate their friends to strive. Later, Shin returns to see Mark's father, who shows professionalism by finishing his innovative sword order with replaceable blades very quickly. And to take advantage of being back there, Shin buys accessories for all the girls in the group so that they also have protective magic, which makes Sicilian slightly jealous. Then, August thinks that the kingdom's army could use this new type of weapon, as it would help in manufacturing weapons at low cost since they would probably soon have to face a difficult war against the Blusphia Empire who wanted to attack them without reason. Everyone is worried, but August tells them to calm down since although there is a chance the war will drag on and they might need them, it hasn't started yet. But he reminds them that as agreed, Shin would stay out of it. After all, his father had promised not to involve him in military matters. But Shin makes it clear that if necessary, he will enter the battlefield voluntarily to protect his dear friends. Meanwhile, we see that King Dis reports that the Empire was already advancing on the kingdom and orders the withdrawal of forces to reduce the impact of the war that was about to start. However, the Blusphia troops then retreat and Emperor Harold wonders why the kingdom was able to send troops to the border since according to the informant, they were not capable of defending themselves due to problems with demons. Realizing he was deceived, he vows to take revenge on Zest for giving him false information. Then, some soldiers appear terrified, reporting that the place was swarming with demons, and Emperor Harold orders his troops to retreat immediately. Meanwhile, at the kingdom's troop camp, they find it strange that the Empire is already retreating when one of their men reports that they were attacked by demons. Meanwhile, the creatures attack everyone in their path, destroying everything around them, and we see that Strom was behind the attack, and besides, he had turned his maid Miria into a demonoid and his plans were just beginning. Days later, at the Imperial Castle, Harold asks his men to deal with the demons when Strom appears and ends the Emperor without mercy. 3 days later, the kingdom's army goes to the site where the troops were attacked to investigate. There, they finally discovered that the demonoid survived the fight against Shin, and that he was the one responsible for instigating the war. To make matters worse, Strom had transformed all the people attacked by his demons into demonoids, forming an army of more than a dozen. Fortunately, the army managed to retreat and return to the kingdom safely to report on the discoveries and the dangers that lay ahead. King Dis said they were wise to retreat in such a situation and pondered what to do next. Later, the magic school's professor informed the students that due to the threat of demons, they would be strengthening their combat forces, which included enhancing the training of the students who would now train alongside the knights' training school to learn to work together, sharing strengths between mages and knights. The problem was that the magic school students didn't get along with the knights. While one side focused on physical improvement, the other completely disregarded it to focus on spells, leading them to mockingly call the magic students sprouts, while they were called muscle brains by the mages. You can imagine that nobody liked the idea of this partnership. Moreover, 2 of Shin's classmates, Tony and Julius, came from knight families, making it harder for them since they had recently sided with the knight school, mocking the magic students. However, Maria, who had always been a mage, said they were much stronger in combat than the knights, and Shin tried to calm her down by saying that one simply complemented the other, since he knew how to fight with both magic and sword, understanding the importance of both sides. Sicilian asked if he had been trained by a knight, and Shin shared that he was trained by Mitchell, which amazed everyone since he had learned magic and item enchantment from 2 national heroes and sword fighting from the swordsman and former Commander Mitchell, known as the best with the sword, though for Shin, he was just a very demanding teacher. They wondered how the night school students would envy Shin for being trained by Mitchell. But for him, what mattered was making the most of the joint training, although unfortunately, his class was still unwilling to give this partnership a chance. Later, they gathered for training and were divided into teams of 8, 4 mages and 4 knights, to patrol the forest on a demon hunt, meaning they would train their students while also reducing the creature population. Just like the magic school students, the knights were also unhappy about being forced to work together because in their view, the mages would just get in the way. But Shin was focused only on learning to work together, and knowing that none of his peers had faced demons before, he asked if it had been different with the knights, but the group took his question as if Shin was bragging about having already defeated a demonoid. He even tried to explain that he just wanted to know the team's experience since they were about to face demons, and even said that if they kept dividing the group like this, they would die. But since that didn't change their attitude, August intervened and said that if they thought the mages would just hinder them, then they should face a demon without their support, to understand the purpose of the joint training. And of course, being the prince, everyone bowed their heads and agreed to the terms. Thus, the group arrived at the location where the patrol would start, right where there was a high likelihood of encountering a strong demon. There, they met the group guides, who were the brothers Chris and Sieg, and since the 2 were in charge of the king's security, they were quite popular in both schools, and everyone started to flatter them. Then, the patrol began, and they informed the guides that the knights would face the demons alone because they did not understand the purpose of the exercise, and Chris said that they would soon realize the mistake they had made, which would prevent future problems. August commented that he was also unsure if Maria had understood the purpose yet, but she said that having seen Shin face a demonoid, she recognized that she could not face a demon without a knight's help. Sieg said that recognizing one's weaknesses was good because it would make her stronger, leaving the girl completely enamored by the court mage's words. The group continued patrolling, with the knights tense as it was their first hunt when Shin sensed a demon approaching. Sieg felt it too and warned the knights to prepare for battle. Then, a boar demon appeared, and the worst part was that Shin still thought it would be tasty to eat if it weren't a demon. The knights decided to show their potential to the group, but ended up getting beaten up by the boar. As it became clear that they were not capable of defeating the creature, Shin stepped forward and finished off the demon with a single blow, leaving the knights impressed with his ability. Chris then scolded the knights who had been boasting about being the best in the school, but ended up getting beaten by a weak and small demon like that. Then, Sicilian used a restoration spell to heal their wounds, making the knights feel embarrassed for having underestimated the mages. They were also enchanted by Sicilian's beauty and started being overly nice to the girl, which made Shin quite jealous, but he wasn't the only one, as Maria and Miranda, a girl from the night school, were quite envious of the special treatment Sicilian was receiving. However, Sieg interrupted them to warn that another demon was on the way. Shin used his searching magic to locate and saw not just one, but several demons heading their way. Then 2 students who were fleeing appeared and told them to run because there were at least 100 demons coming. Then Shin asked to handle the situation alone, and everyone was worried, but Sieg knew his brother could easily deal with them. Then everyone moved back to give Shin space to unleash his full power. As the demons approached, they discovered it was a demonized herd fleeing from a demonized tiger, but Shin cast a spell that hit all of them, defeating the 100 demonized animals in one go, leaving the knights astounded by the strength of this new hero. And Miranda even apologized to Shin for trying to belittle him and admitted that deep down, she was just envious of his level being so much above hers, and she also apologized to Sicilian for offending her boyfriend, making the 2 die of embarrassment. It was clear that they liked each other, and all that was missing was for them to make their romance official. After that, the group continues their patrol and encounters a demonized bear. This time, however, they do an excellent job as a team, alternating between magic and sword attacks, which leaves their guides quite proud. Sieg even asks Shin how they are so skilled that they even surpass those at the court. Shin explains that they train together in a magic study group, with him teaching things like the way he visualizes spells. Sieg gets super excited and asks to learn Shin's teachings too. But August, who overhears the conversation, says that as a military man he might expose Shin's powers, which would definitely cause problems if it spread to neighboring lands. For safety, he asks Shin not to share his magical talents. However, since Sieg was very interested and trustworthy, August briefly explains Shin's methods, which were basically about practicing magic control. It was something so simple that Sieg thought August might be withholding some information. To prove it to him, August asks the girls to project their magic barriers. Sieg is astonished by how resilient they are, but Maria says that they still make theirs much thinner than Shin's barrier and that they have much to learn. Nevertheless, Sieg is already impressed with their level, making Maria once again smitten with him. Meanwhile, we see that another part of Shin's friends were in a group, and one of the knights named Giulio didn't like Tony, who came from a family of knights and had known him since high school. Just like in Shin's team, the knights in that group also wanted to proceed without cooperating with the magic school students, ignoring the purpose of the exercise. However, they also struggle and are saved by the mages. Yet, Giulio remains annoyed with Tony, and his friends say there must be a reason for his anger. After some thought, Tony remembers that he dated a girl Giulio liked. He talks about it as if it were no big deal, but it was obvious to everyone that this was certainly the cause of Giulio's fury. Meanwhile, in another group, we see that they were not much different from Shin and Tony's team, as the knights were also arrogant and, like the others, couldn't handle the workload without the help of their magic-using colleagues who even flaunted their powerful spells. At the end of the day, everyone meets up at the rendezvous point and briefly shares how they fared, with everyone successfully facing demons despite the issues they had with the knights. However, Maria doesn't miss the chance to tease her friends by saying that Shin and Sicilian were glued together the whole time, making the couple blush once again. But Shin was feeling a bit down and his friends ask why. August takes the moment to explain that all members of Shin's study group, except for Shin himself, will be monitored for being very strong, and for the same reason will be part of a special unit after they graduate. The reason Shin felt so down was that he felt responsible for having changed the course of his friends' lives, but everyone sees this news as a good thing as it meant they already had a secured future. Because of this, they ask Shin to teach them more so they could become even stronger and prepared for when they become the special unit. Several days pass, and we see that now the study group trains their magic in a secluded place for safety since they cannot be seen. Additionally, all of them have become much stronger, evolving and improving their spells. After the training, August updates everyone on the situation with the demonoids that, to avoid panic, was not being disclosed to the general public, but they could know since they would be important in the battle against them. He tells them that the demonoids were attacking everything, causing disastrous damage in the city in addition to many lives lost. To make matters worse, each time they attacked, the number of demonoids grew as they demonized the victims they found, and Shin wonders what Strom could be plotting since just one demonoid was enough to shake an entire nation. Knowing the danger that was coming was much greater than they thought, Shin decides to take advantage of the school holiday to take the group to a training camp, which excites everyone. As the nobles own their own lands, they analyze together which would be ideal for conducting the training and decide to go to Sicilian's house, which has a thermal spring area. However, when Shin shares the plan with his grandparents, Melida is worried about what the youngsters might get up to without adult supervision and decides to go along to keep a close eye on them, and Merlin joins her, excited to participate as well. And so, they all embark on a trip to Sicilian's house, and along the way, Shin learns more about his grandmother Melida, who changed the way mages use enchanted items. Previously, they were only used for combat, but now they are useful in everyday life, which has improved many people's lives, and out of respect, she came to be known as the Guru. Still on the way, the group encounters some demons, but now that they are strong and prepared, everyone shows interest in defeating the demons, and they decide by drawing straws who would get the benefit of putting the training into practice, and Lin ends up winning. Then she faces the demons and defeats them all easily with her spell, leaving the bystanders amazed at how a simple child defeated so many medium demons in such a short time, and leaving Shin's grandparents proud to see the evolution of the team. After this long journey, they finally arrive at the city of Claude where Sicilian's house is located. As soon as they arrive, the family's servants greet the visitors and ask Shin to give a happy life to their side, meaning even the people there already knew about the couple. Later, the group decides to take a relaxing bath, and in the men's bathroom, Merlin thanks his grandson for finding so many good friends, since Shin had never had friends his age before. But August says he is the one who should be thankful because before he never had a friend who treated him so informally, while Shin treated him just like a cousin. Then everyone begins to thank Shin for his friendship, and he takes that moment to thank his grandfather for raising him into who he is today, a person surrounded by many friends thanks to him. Hearing this, the old man gets a bit emotional. Meanwhile, in the women's restroom, Melida also thanks the girls for their friendship with Shin, and just like the guys, the girls express their gratitude for her friendship too. They even mention how lucky they feel for having learned so much from Shin. Hearing this, Melida becomes emotional herself and decides that she and Merlin will also start training everyone during the camp, just like Shin has been doing. So, during the camp, Shin and his grandparents start training the study group, helping everyone improve even more than expected. But Shin knows they still have a long way to go to face the upcoming danger, so he thinks even he must become stronger. That thought alone worries his friends quite a bit, as the guy already has enough power to cause immense destruction. As a precaution, everyone puts up a protective barrier around Shin for him to safely practice his magic. And just as expected, Shin displays an absurdly powerful attack, making everyone tremble in fear at the thought of being hit by something like that. Fortunately, Shin manages to keep the damage limited to his intended target, proving he's still in control. Afterwards, they return to Sicilian's mansion, where August takes the chance to ask Shin to take him back to the castle, since it was difficult to receive updates on the demonoid situation from the camp. However, once they arrive through the portal, August immediately runs into his fiancée Ellie and his younger sister May. Both are pretty upset he went off to the camp without them, especially May, who's a huge fan of Melida. The girls ask to join them at the camp, and although August initially tries to refuse, his father insists it's okay since Shin's grandparents are there supervising, and it's easy for Shin to teleport them anyway. Left without options, August brings Ellie and May along to Sicilian's hometown. August makes sure to clarify that it's a training camp, not a vacation, so he won't have much time for them. Ellie, however, doesn't mind because her real reason for tagging along is just to keep an eye on him out of pure jealousy. Shin mistakenly thinks Ellie is jealous of the other girls at camp, but in reality, she's actually jealous of Shin himself. August can't stop talking about how comfortable he feels around his cousin, something he's never experienced with friends before. He clarifies to Ellie that while Shin makes him feel free, it doesn't mean he feels uncomfortable around her, something that instantly reassures her and strengthens their relationship. Later, at a restaurant, August casually mentions that Shin also has a special girl in his life. Shin tries to deny it, unsure if Sicilian really feels the same way, but August warns him he can't just wait for her to confess first. According to August, this is the perfect time for Shin to finally reveal his feelings, leaving Shin deep in thought. When they return to Sicilian's home, Shin feels completely awkward, and things only worsen when Ellie and May loudly figure out Sicilian is the girl they talked about in the restaurant, embarrassing him even more. Afterward, the two newcomers introduce themselves to everyone, and May excitedly asks to hold Melida's hands, thrilled to finally meet her idol. Melida jokes about how even her own grandson doesn't request things like that. Everyone starts talking about how difficult it must have been for Melida to raise someone as powerful as Shin, which makes him feel a bit uneasy. Caught up in the moment, Sicilian blurts out her feelings, announcing she'll be very happy to hold hands with their future children. Immediately realizing what she's just said, she turns bright red and runs away in embarrassment. But now that she's openly mentioned having children with him, Shin finally understands that Sicilian does feel the same way about him. It's about time he makes a move he should have made long ago. He goes after her, and finally alone, they're both extremely shy, but Shin summons his courage and brings up the day they first met. Sicilian clearly remembers it well, confessing he's been helping her ever since. Seizing the moment, Shin admits he's thought she was beautiful from the start. Sicilian, now thoroughly embarrassed, says she felt exactly the same about him. Without hesitating, Shin finally declares his feelings clearly. They both confess their love, and Sicilian tearfully reveals she'd always believed Shin didn't feel the same way, thinking he was just kind to everyone and didn't have special feelings for her. In reality, he was just incredibly slow to catch on. But now, determined not to waste any more time, Shin officially asks Sicilian to be his girlfriend. With romance filling the air, they're about to share their first kiss when, unfortunately, they're interrupted by their entire group of friends, who were eagerly waiting to witness this long-awaited moment. Even Shin's grandparents are caught spying on them. Since everyone's so curious, Shin openly confirms they're now officially dating, prompting cheers all around. August congratulates them, but quickly reminds everyone they still need to focus on training. Shin jokingly asks August why he insisted he confess his feelings during such a crucial time, and August seriously replies he feared waiting until after the war might mean losing the chance entirely. The next day, Shin continues training the group, but this time in a much more fun way. At the beach, he has everyone play volleyball using magic to move a special ball around. The group becomes so excited by this new training method, they nearly hit Ellie and May, who are peacefully watching from the sidelines, enjoying the beach. That evening, everyone gathers to chat, and Shin finds it odd that his friends already knew Ellie since he'd never even known his cousin had a fiancée until now. His friends explain that royalty and nobles hold a gathering when children turn 5, which is how they all met. Shin realizes just how different his childhood was when he was 5. He'd already been hunting animals in the forest. They also remembered how, at the party, a bunch of girls had gathered around August. Of course, everyone wanted to flatter the prince and leave a good impression. August said it was exhausting, and that Ellie had been the only one who acted totally differently. She hadn't shown the slightest interest and even shot him down. He kept talking, admitting that from that moment on, he liked her. That made Ellie go all shy, and then Maria chimed in, complaining that everyone seemed to find their match, except her, which made the whole group burst out laughing. But all that noise ended up alerting Melida, who heard the commotion coming from the room. Since it was already way past bedtime, everyone scrambled to dive under the blankets to avoid getting caught. The plan might have worked, too, but Sicilian got super flustered being so close to her crush and accidentally made a noise. That was enough for Melida to catch the couple and scold Shin, thinking they were up to something they shouldn't be doing. Of course, that led to more noise from the rest of the group busted. One by one, everyone was exposed, and naturally, Melida gave the entire gang a lecture and ordered them all to bed. The next day, the lovebirds were still clearly nervous around each other. But even before they could sit down for breakfast, Sicilian asked Shin to request permission from her parents for them to date. So off they went to talk to them. Shin, completely tense and expecting the worst, made the request. But instead of rejection, Sicilian's father lit up with joy. He was genuinely thrilled that someone like Shin had chosen his daughter. Her mother, on the other hand, pointed out that because they were a noble family viscounts, it wasn't appropriate for Sicilian to date unless she was already engaged. Embarrassed by her mother's request, Sicilian kept quiet, but Shin didn't hesitate. He said he'd gladly accept that condition and get engaged to the girl he loved, which made Sicilian beam with happiness. Back at camp, the training continued, and Ellie was surprised by how skilled everyone had become with magic. Merlin asked if she and May wanted to join in, but Ellie admitted she didn't really have a knack for it. May, however, was excited to give it a try and totally impressed everyone with how well she controlled her magic. She clearly had serious potential to become a mage in the future. That fired Lynn up. She didn't want to fall behind. But, as usual, she went a little overboard with her magic, which wasn't exactly rare for her. Then she and Alice started thinking about how May might outshine them someday, and the jealousy hit hard. Poor May ended up hiding behind Shin, who suddenly found himself on the receiving end of a very jealous brother, though he quickly admitted he was just messing around with his little sister. Meanwhile, over in the imperial capital, Strom was being updated by his servant, Miria, on the current situation. She told him that, due to their constant raids on caravans, cities across the empire were beginning to suffer from food shortages. Strom decided the time was right to take his next step. Back at the camp, Shin went off to train some new magic again. As usual, the whole crew backed off to a safe distance, setting up protective barriers just in case, despite Shin constantly saying they were overreacting. After assuring them he wasn't going to train offensive spells, the others finally lowered their guard a bit, though they still looked uneasy. But all Shin did was make a rock float. Everyone was stunned. They had never seen anything like it. Shin explained that he'd simply applied anti-gravity to the stone. But, as usual, no one really understood his explanation. Still, the magic was amazing. Then he shocked them even more. He floated off the ground himself and used wind magic to move like a bird through the air. Everyone just stared in awe. But Shin pointed out that Strom could also fly, and if he was going to stand a chance against him, he needed to master it too. After the training session, Shin finally told his grandparents about the engagement. He and Sicilian apologized for not saying anything earlier, but Melida and Merlin admitted they'd been expecting it sooner or later and weren't too surprised. Still, they asked to speak with her parents before announcing anything officially. So, with everyone present, Shin explained that he was adopted, assuming the engagement had only been approved because he was the grandson of the nation's heroes. But Sicilian's father looked disappointed, and for a second, they thought he was going to call the whole thing off. Turns out, he was just upset that they thought he'd approved the engagement for shallow reasons. In truth, he was happy because he believed Shin genuinely cared for his daughter, putting her well-being above all else. Both he and Sicilian's mother accepted the engagement, not because of titles, but because of Shin's character. Melida and Merlin were surprised and apologized for jumping to conclusions, but Sicilian's parents understood. She also made it clear she didn't care about any of that after all. She hadn't even known Shin was their grandson when they met. She liked him for who he was. Shin thanked them for their trust and promised he'd live up to it and protect Sicilian. He also took a moment to express how grateful he was to his grandparents for raising him with so much love, which got them all emotional. Back at camp, Shin enchanted everyone's uniforms with powerful defensive magic, making them even more effective. With the upgraded gear, August immediately realized this wasn't going to be an ordinary training session. Shin confirmed it. They were finally going to face a catastrophic class demon. Naturally, everyone was on edge, but Shin reassured them. They'd grown a lot, and now they had protective gear to keep them safe. Because of the danger level, May and Ellie had to sit this one out, but May was determined not to miss it. So Shin handed her a long-distance communication device that could send and receive magic-based audio. With that, little May would still be able to follow the training from afar, and it would be great practice for using magical tools. But then her grandmother found out Shin was once again using one of his innovative spells, potentially causing trouble if the wrong people got interested. She scolded him, and he took off before things got worse, leaving the device behind. And so, the group sets out in search of a catastrophic class demon and ends up facing a lion. It's a powerful creature, sure, but nowhere near as agile as a tiger. Because of that, Shin orders only the support members to handle the attack. They end up going a little overboard, though, and take the beast down so completely that there's not even a trace left behind. That moment becomes proof of just how capable his classmates are. Shin points out that if even the support crew was more than enough, then the ones trained in offensive magic could probably take down a catastrophic class demon all on their own. So, one by one, the magic specialists step up to face their own monsters, no backup, no help, and every single one of them comes out victorious. Later on, Shin and Sicilian finally celebrate their wedding, and the guy is completely smitten, practically glowing at the sight of his stunning bride. The love between them is obvious, and with hearts full, the king formally acknowledges their engagement. Glasses are raised, and everyone cheers to the couple's happiness. But since Shin hadn't officially proposed to Sicilian before the engagement party, well, he takes care of that afterward, better late than never, right? Of course, she says yes, beaming with joy as she receives her engagement ring. And at long last, the two finally get to share a kiss without anyone barging in. The training at the camp continues, and the class learns to fly thanks to Shin's new gravity-removing magic. His friends thoroughly enjoy flying, but through a communicator similar to a loudspeaker, Shin alerts everyone that it was time to stop. August thinks this device would be perfect to use at his upcoming coronation. Meanwhile, at the Imperial Castle, Zest and Miria inform Strom that the last city of the Empire has fallen. His plan of attacking caravans on the roads had caused a food shortage, and as the nobility continued in luxury, the starving commoners began to feel a desire to rebel. Through this desire, Strom managed to demonize everyone to seek revenge against the nobles, destroying the cities one by one until they took over the entire empire. Miria knew her master, Strom, hated the nobility, but she wondered why he would go so far when his actions were also affecting the commoners. Then, Strom announces to the demonoids from his imperial throne that, thanks to everyone's efforts, they had finally brought the empire to ruin. His people celebrate, but upon realizing that Strom had no plan for what to do next, they suggest they continue to bring down other kingdoms until they dominate the world, as there was no reason to be content with just the empire. However, Strom had achieved his goal and desired no further troubles. Therefore, he releases those with ambitions different from his, leading most of the demonoids to leave. But he does not care, as all that mattered to him was the downfall of the empire. Miria then says that despite knowing Strom was once in line to become emperor, she did not understand why he was so driven to achieve the goal of destroying the empire. Then, Strom begins to share his story with her and Zest. It all began 2 years ago when he was a lord who, unlike other nobles, treated the commoners well. Thanks to this, he received many commoners from outside his lands, and with many workers, his cultivated area greatly increased. One of his men asked why he treated the commoners so kindly, and Strom recounted how when he was younger, during one of his travels in the kingdom of King Dis, he was shocked to see that there, unlike in the empire, there were no slaves and even the commoners lived comfortably. Thus, comparing it with the life they had in the empire, he realized they needed to change their ways. Additionally, Strom had a happy life alongside his beautiful wife who was expecting a child. However, the other nobles hated Strom because his commoners left their lands to live in his domains. Therefore, Harold, who would become the Emperor of Blesvia, convinces everyone to set a trap for Strom to come to the capital to prevent him from becoming an emperor, as they knew if that happened, he would benefit the commoners, an idea they all abhorred. Harold asked the nobles to keep Strom in the capital as long as possible so he could use this time to orchestrate his downfall. To lure him into the trap, they decide to feign interest in hearing his ideas. Unfortunately, as soon as Strom received the letter from the nobles, he fell right into the plan, happy to go to the meeting in the capital, even against his wife's advice, who found it strange the nobles wanted to see her husband since they disliked him. However, he did not listen to her, being one of the best in magic in the empire, having even been a demon hunter in his youth, and thus knew how to defend himself very well and had nothing to worry about. Then Strom leaves for the capital, leaving his wife at home, but as soon as he leaves, women and children begin to disappear in his lands, which worries everyone. Things worsen when a fake military policeman from the capital appears, saying there was a kidnapper nearby who sold commoners as slaves. All the commoners fear the mysterious kidnapper and begin to question why a lord like Strom would be so kind to them, making Harold's plan a success. However, the nobles cannot hold Strom in the capital for more than 2 months as they would have liked, because his wife was about to give birth. Then Harold decides to finalize his plan ahead of schedule. For this, he sends the fake policeman to tell the commoners that they had found a trail of the kidnapper and would need their help to capture the criminal. Thus, with a charade, the policeman shows an inspection order to the man driving Strom's carriage to have permission to look at what was being transported and to catch the missing women being transported, leaving no doubt for the commoners that Strom was responsible for the kidnappings. With that, fear dominates the commoners since they knew that because Strom was a noble, the police would be slow to act, making them decide to deal with Strom with their own hands and attack his house. Then, when Strom finally returns home after a long period away, he finds his mansion in flames. Strom tells Miria and Zest that he tried to save his wife, but it was too late. The crowd had already devastated everything, believing they had avenged the kidnapper of commoners. Devastated, Strom discovers what had happened and questions the people why a policeman would take civilians to follow some investigation and why he would be so foolish as to transport kidnapped people in a carriage bearing his crest, making them realize they had been deceived. However, despite Strom realizing he had fallen into a trap set by the nobles, especially Harold, the man who benefited the most from his tragedy, he could not forgive the commoners for taking his beloved wife. Thus, consumed by hatred, he becomes a demonoid who swears revenge on all the nobles and commoners of the empire, having finally fulfilled his desire after 2 years. After learning of their master's story, Zest decides to help him create a new life goal. For this, he asks another demonoid named Lawrence to join the others who left Strom and convince them to attack the Kingdom of Swede, a small land bordering the kingdom of Earlshade of King Dis. All this to attract Shin as a test to measure his strength, as he was a perfect new target for their master, Strom. After some time, back in the Kingdom of Earlshade, the day of Prince August's coronation finally arrives, officially making him the future heir to the throne. He vows to dedicate his life to his nation and its people. All was well until a messenger arrived to report that their neighboring Kingdom of Swede was being attacked by several demonoids. The people were quite worried as it was only a matter of time before the situation spiraled out of control and the demonoids reached them. However, August assured them that they were well prepared for this scenario, having assembled a group ready to confront the threat. August then introduced Shin, the grandson of Merlin and Melida and their new hero, who had already defeated a demonoid. He explained that Shin had been training a group, of which he was a member, so that together they could defeat any demonoids that appeared. He announced that this group would travel to the Kingdom of Swede to address the problem and asked Shin to give a motivational speech and to name their group since calling them a study group might not make a strong impact. Caught off guard, Shin improvised a speech and a name for his team, declaring that they, the Supreme Mages, possessed the necessary strength to defeat the demonoids. This was enough to rally the populace, but it took his friends by surprise with the impromptu group name, while August enjoyed putting his cousin in that spot, though some approved of the chosen name. Thus, the Supreme Mages set off for the Kingdom of Swede to confront the demonoids. Earlier, we see the kingdom's watch soldiers when they spotted the red signal from the border. They examined the situation through a telescope and realized they were about to be attacked by a horde of demonoids. Desperate, the leader sent one of them to seek help from the Kingdom of Earlshade, but feared for their lives as the message would take days to deliver and even more days for reinforcements to arrive. With no escape, he ordered all soldiers to activate the magical artifacts to protect the wall at all costs. Fortunately for them, as soon as the message was delivered, Shin's group traveled by flying, much faster than if they had used carriages. Distracted, they chatted along the way about their new name and the couples within the group, leaving Maria irritated for having no one and eager to take out her frustration on the demonoids, just as they sighted the Kingdom of Swede. Upon arrival, Shin immediately protected a mother and her child who were being attacked by 2 demonoids. One even mocked Shin for thinking a mere human could defeat one of them, but a glimpse of Shin's magic was enough to change its attitude and die of fright. After defeating the two and ensuring the woman and her daughter were safe, they moved on. August then announced to everyone in the kingdom that he, the Prince of Earlshade, along with his group of mages, were there with the hero Shin to protect them all and defeat the demonoids, causing the people to celebrate. And so, the supreme mages got to work, and Shin asked Sicilian to take care of the injured since she was very skilled in healing magic. The two parted, asking each other to be careful while Lawrence watched from afar, eager to see the hero's power. Meanwhile, the group began facing the demonoids in pairs, with Alice and Lynn managing to locate one. The demonoid taunted the two for being mere girls, irritating Alice, but Lynn calmed her friend with a jet of water to keep her from being careless. Agreeing, she said she would focus so they could defeat the demonoid, but Lynn had already done so with a single strike without her noticing. Alice felt a bit down about the situation, especially since the guy had been human not long ago. But Lynn reminded her that they were now demons who, even while conscious, were killing for fun, making them even worse than demonized animals. At that moment, the two heard another demonoid nearby, enjoying the suffering of one of the kingdom's soldiers. But as it moved to attack the poor soldier, the two appeared, protecting him with their magic barriers. With Alice realizing Lynn was right, she fried the demonoid, releasing all her anger, and afterward, they helped the wounded soldier, who said he was okay to walk to the aid station and released them to continue their work. The two then bet on who could defeat more demonoids. Elsewhere, one of the demons approached the soldiers wielding magical artifacts, wishing he had one for himself. Back with the group of mages, two from August's escort faced two demonoids while trying to extract valuable information about whether Strom was behind the attack. Failing to learn anything, they finished off the two. Meanwhile, the rest of the group was also doing a great job protecting people and defeating the demonoids. Some even decided to attack the aid station, thinking it would be easy since it was full of vulnerable people. However, the couple Mark and Olivia were on guard, and despite their fear, they managed to find the strength to protect each other. Meanwhile, Sicilian was inside, fighting to heal as many people as possible. As for her beloved Shin, he was continuously eliminating demonoids as expected. This made Lawrence tremble with fear. After all, he had not imagined that a human could have such power, though he should have known since he was aware that Shin had beaten his master. Nearby, we see that August had paired up with Maria, and both were doing well until they encountered the demonoid who had obtained the magical artifact. Recognizing August's voice, it thought that defeating the prince would make his group surrender, but August explained that he was not the leader of his group. Realizing the demonoid's importance, he thought he would be the one to defeat it to make the others surrender. However, it was Maria who launched a surprise attack, although it had no effect. Then the demonoid struck her and threw her away. Surely the attacks were fatal, but thanks to her protective uniform, she came away with just a scratch on her face. However, the demon understood what had happened and decided to attack the unprotected parts of the uniform. To leave no openings for him, Maria launched a series of attacks in quick succession, but to her surprise, he remained unharmed thanks to a magical artifact that could project a magical barrier. The duo then knew what they had to do with just a glance and began casting spells non-stop, making the demonoid question whether it was safe to rely on the magical artifact. However, he didn't realize that getting distracted would cause the barrier to disappear and allow Maria to land a blow, taunting him and distracting him so that August could deliver the final blow, demonstrating perfect teamwork. Meanwhile, the King of Sweden celebrated, feeling the battle was finally nearing its end. Melida and Merlin were there with him, ensuring his safety and cheering for the group's excellent performance. At the same time, Lawrence began to fear for his life as he realized that the problem wasn't just Shin but all his friends. He communicated with Zest, who realized his mistake in underestimating the hero's power. Although he considered other demonoids expendable, he still regretted losing so many of them. Since Lawrence couldn't handle the retreat alone, he sent Miria to assist, who entered the kingdom launching full-scale attacks. Meanwhile, Strom arrived at the scene, lamenting missing out on the fun. As Sicilian continued to strive to heal as many people as possible, encountering a particularly difficult case of a severely injured man, Miria was injuring several other soldiers, proving to be far superior to other demonoids. Even Shin felt there was a distinctly different energy in the place. However, before she could harm more people, Alice and Lynn appeared, saving the soldiers and introducing themselves as the super mages. The two fought with Miria, but in a moment of distraction, she managed to hit Alice, who survived thanks to the protection of her uniform. However, Miria decided to use the poor girl as a hostage, enjoying the situation. Nearby, Lawrence sensed Miria's presence and new reinforcements had arrived. He then ordered all demonoids to retreat, but they didn't listen as they still wanted to continue causing destruction. However, they quickly changed their minds when they saw Shin approaching with all his power. Everyone began to regroup to escape as quickly as possible across the rooftops. Shin then took flight, attacking several demonoids at once, but as he still had to be careful not to hit the soldiers, he let some escape. He thought about chasing them, but he spotted where his friends were fighting with Miria, completely at a disadvantage. She wounded Tony and then Lynn and Alice, but before she could harm another of their group, Shin arrived to save the day. With all his friends injured, Shin prepared to face Miria, who thought to take advantage of the moment to see if the hero was really as good as he was supposed to be, since that was the purpose of the attack. Then, the two began to fight, but at the first cut Miria received, she realized it wasn't safe to stay there, and just at that moment, the rest of the Supreme Mages appeared, thinking to help but only providing Miria with a chance to escape. Lawrence seized the moment when everyone was surrounded and asked Miria to use her explosive magic. Shin saw that they were about to suffer a massive attack and, realizing how weak his friends were, he shouted for August to help protect everyone. Fortunately, the hero managed to keep his group safe and, despite the demonoids escaping, everyone ended up well. August wondered what the reason for the attack was since they hadn't seen Strom, and Shin, although he couldn't answer, recognized that if Strom had been there, the damage would have been much greater. Meanwhile, Strom watched his people retreat, completely defeated. But Zest's plan worked as Strom acknowledged that he was bored without a purpose and that Shin might be a good challenge. Subsequently, the group went to the aid station to see how Sicilian was doing and found Mark and Olivia helping some people. Then, August asked everyone in the group to help with healing magic while Shin went to see his beloved, who was frustrated and exhausted from her efforts to save the same severely injured man, with his worried wife by his side. But after struggling so much to heal him, Sicilian thought that magic couldn't solve everything and lamented her inability to help. However, she remembered that her uniform had self-healing magic and began to remove her clothes to give them to the man. But Shin arrived in time to warn her that the uniform wouldn't help. Sicilian and the man's wife began to cry, thinking there was no solution, but Shin promised to find a way and began to heal the man, focusing on each area of the body one at a time instead of trying to heal everything. And so, he was quickly cured, impressing everyone. Sicilian began to lament not being as useful as him, feeling she had failed in her mission. Then Shin explained that he only managed to save the man's life because she had kept him alive during the battle and reminded her of the number of people she had indeed saved on her own, with everyone being very grateful for everything she had done. After saving the day, the King of Swede thanked the group of mages for everything they had done. August took the moment to say that although they didn't understand the reason for the attack, Strom, the leader of the demonoids, wasn't present. Therefore, he deduced that Strom might have sent the demonoids merely as a distraction to draw Shin out, since Strom knew he was a threat, even considering that he might have wanted the problematic demonoids eliminated. However, in any case, it was certain that the problem was far from over and they could attack again at any moment. For this reason, August announced his desire to hold meetings with several allied nations to address the problem together and asked if the King of Swede would like to join them. The king, understanding that it was indeed a heavy burden for a single kingdom, agreed to discuss the matter and said he was looking forward to August gathering other nations to join the union. After speaking with the king, they were ready to leave the Kingdom of Swede, and Shin thought that if he had used his portal to take everyone there would have been much less trouble and fewer people injured. But since he could only open portals to places he had been before, he planned to accompany August on his journey through allied nations, and his cousin said he thought the same, deciding together that they would protect the world. As they return home to the Kingdom of Earlshade, the Supreme Mages are greeted with fireworks and hugs. Then, August speaks with his father to discuss his plan to secure allies from other nations and to request permission to act as the negotiator, given his status as both prince and a member of the Supreme Mages. Of course, Dis grants his request, and Shin's grandparents understand that he must also go, along with the entire group of mages. Consequently, Ellie and May ask to join the group once again. August is concerned about their safety, but his escort promises to protect the two, and it is decided that everyone will set off together on the new adventure. Meanwhile, in the Imperial Castle, Strom sends a "told you so" to the three demonoids who stirred trouble with Shin despite all warnings, and Zest apologizes for acting without permission, wondering if he should really be happy that his master has found such a perilous new life challenge. However, this is not Strom's only goal. It seems he has resumed his experiments, this time with Miria, to find a way for their species to reproduce. Back in the kingdom of Earlshade, the Supreme Mages bid farewell to the king and Shin's grandparents and embark on a lengthy journey to find allied nations to save the world. At night, Merlin and Melida ponder how lonely it will be with just the two of them, when suddenly Shin's portal opens and the house begins to fill up. Since they are a large group, Shin explains to his grandparents that to save on hotel costs, they would return home through the portal every night, meaning the poor couple won't get a quiet night's sleep thanks to the young Supreme Mages.